What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel and some more bolt action coverage here as we continue on through Market Garden, taking a look at the next scenario. And this one is called a hot drop zone, which, I mean, most of them tend to be, right? So this one is somewhat similar to the previous ones that we've been reviewing here, as again, you might expect here with Market Garden. But again, it's got some unique wrinkles here that just make it a little bit different than the others here. So paratroopers can land at the right location at the right time and still find themselves in deep trouble as soon as they hit the ground, basically. Historically, there was very little opposition on the LZ slash DZs used by the first lift of airborne troops, but this might not have been the case. The British landed en masse in quite a small area, but the Americans had many objectives and therefore many more drop zones. So any of those units might have had the misfortune to hit their drop site, basically just as German column happened to be passing by. This was considerably greater intervention. There was considerably greater intervention by the Germans on the second and third days of the battle. Replicating the arrival of a single battalion, let alone a brigade, is really too big a project for a bolt-action game, but it's perfectly possible to focus on the experience of a force ranging from a single platoon to a full company without putting an unreasonable strain on the system itself. The scenario could be adjusted to the size of the collections available as well. So, for obvious reasons, the drop zones were the clearest and fast terrain that could be identified by the planners. But that being said, they all bordered on fairly dense terrain, especially woodland. So, equally, unless the German player can commit an overwhelming force during the actual landing process, the objective is to disrupt the enemy as far as possible without sustaining an unacceptable level of damage to their own forces. So the American force in this particular scenario should have a 3-to-1 advantage in points, which is going to be pretty rough for the Germans. However, the German forces can be drawn from any combination of types, but with the proviso that there can never be more than one combat vehicle and absolutely no tanks. Even in situations where the Germans were aware of an Allied landing zone or drop zone, such as the arrival of Brigadier Hackett's parachute brigade on Ginkle Heath, the zones were sufficiently large that there was no likelihood that all of us defending force would be in a position to fire on the enemy as they landed. So the game is played across the table, and the terrain should be identical to that of the other LZ, DZ scenarios. So an open field surrounded by a fringe of woodland no more than 6 inches deep, with a random scattering of small, low hills that provide concealment of figures which are down or in ambush, but not for those under other orders. So again, we get an idea here. Something along those lines with a little bit of variation is okay. So deployment here. So using the stick special rule, randomize where the U.S. units start the game on the ground, and with every squad or weapons team, but not command groups, carrying a pin marker. Since the American force will be landing on suitable terrain, the units don't suffer the casualty process described in Scenario 3, but up to half of the German units start the game on the south edge of the woods surrounding the landing zone, and up to half these units can be in ambush. The remainder enter the table on the same side. So for the first turn, the airborne player should have only 2/3 as many order dice as he has units to reflect the inevitable confusion, and is ordered by landing under fire. In addition, although the drop occurs in turn 1, in practice, some time would elapse between the first paratrooper exiting the first aircraft and the last paratrooper hitting the ground, and then mustering in the drop zone. So the American player's force should conform to the typical organization of airborne forces and should also outnumber in points the Germans by about 3-to-1. For example, the U.S. player would have 1,500 points, and then the Germans would only have 500. And then from turn 2 onward, the U.S. player should have as many order dice as he has units as the Americans get themselves organized. So again, it's going to be a tough and uphill battle here for the Germans, certainly. So the objective in this one, the role of an airborne unit is to seize an objective and defend it until relieved, not to fight its way to the target. So the Allied player must try to get his force off the north edge of the drop zone as quickly as possible. The German player must try to prevent this or delay progress and inflict as many casualties as possible. Again, going to be a little bit rough when you're outnumbered 3-to-1. The game finishes if the U.S. player has succeeded in extricating all of his force. Otherwise, the game continues in line with the victory conditions until end of turn 6. Speaking of victory conditions, so the U.S. player must move his units off the edge of the table. The U.S. player achieves an outright victory if they can extract 2/3 of the figures under their command. by the end of turn 4, and a marginal victory if they can do so by the end of turn 6. But bear in mind that attrition is an objective in itself. It is the number of men, not the number of units, that is the significant factor here. Any other result means that the enemy have inflicted unacceptable casualties and or delayed progress of the Allied advantage and is a victory for the Germans here. So, again, let's reiterate that. So, you got to move units off the board if you're the American player, and you gain victory here if you get 2/3 of the figures. Again, key word there, figures. So definitely something that you're going to want to keep track of throughout the game, and starting figure count, and then go from there. And you'll know exactly what your exact margin to hit is. So, and then basically as it reads here, so even if that's just slightly under the 2/3, then the Germans have won. So it's going to be a pretty quick scramble here for the Americans, just to try and get bodies off the table as fast as possible. But again, with that 3-to-1 advantage, there's only so much damage that the Germans, I think, will be able to inflict. But again, could be fun to test out with some variations there. And just maybe seeing if any type of lighter vehicle would make sense for the Germans. But again, with only 500 points to play with, there's not going to be that much there. And I mean, honestly, it almost seems like the Americans could just shoot the German force off the table. Have you guys tried this scenario? So the hot drop zone, what would you do differently? Does this seem like a viable scenario for you? Do you think it is too lopsided? Again, if you've played it, let us know in the comments what your results have been. But what could be done here to maybe make it a little bit more balanced? Not that it's necessarily supposed to be all that balanced from the outset. Hit us up in the comments, guys. Let us know what you think about drop zone here compared to the other scenarios we've seen so far. And again, if you've played through that and what your experience has been, whether it's been as the American player or as the German. So leave a comment below, guys, like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.